Howdy, welcome back to Dion Talk. How do I touch my equity? How do I access my equity? How do I get the best return on my money? I'm going to answer a question that I got through an email asking this question. This is going to be a live stream I do on my phone where I probably won't be able to see the questions or answer them. If you want your questions answered during a live stream, every Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. Pacific, I do live streams that generally last as long as the questions do. This question came in and the person says, "Hi Dion, I saw your input on BiggerPockets and I have a question. I refinanced and renovated my parents' house in 2020. It was built in the 1950s. It's nice, but it's old. It had a lot of problems, around $100,000 in rehab. I did floors, windows, the roof, HVAC, kitchen, etc. It cash flows around $1,300 a month. There's about $550,000 in debt, but it's worth about $1.1 million. There are tenants that have lived there for up to 2 years now. As of September, they've been there for 2 years. I have about another year to decide if we want to sell it because it was my parents' primary, and this would help us avoid a capital gains hit. It's an old house, but it's in good condition. The tenants love it. What are your thoughts?" So I can't choose for you, and I don't know your situation, your goals, but I'm going to give you a stream of consciousness thought of what I saw when I saw this question come across, and why I made a video instead of just trying to type out the answer, because there's been several times where people ask me questions very similar to this. The idea here is a lot of people say, how do I use my equity? And I want to kind of redefine the term of equity into the ability to put debt on an existing asset. So I'm going to start with, very quick, the beginning of your question. In 2020, I refinanced and renovated my parents' house. Let's start with that. My parents' house. But you renovated and you refinanced, which means somehow you're involved in the transaction involving your parents' house, which makes this a partnership. So my first bit of advice is here, while this is a partnership, is make it an official partnership. Right now, you refinanced in 2020, you did the renovation, your parents have a year left to decide if they want to sell to use the IRS code 121 to avoid up to $500,000 in capital gains without paying taxes on it. Right now, while everyone's getting along and everything is rosy because home values have gone up and interest rates have doubled or tripled since 2020, and get everything in writing that you can. You want to protect yourself and your interests, and you want to protect your parents' interest. Because in a few years, if something changes and you go to have a disagreement, that is not the time to try to put anything in writing. So we're starting with that first point. In 2020, the person asking me this question refinanced and renovated their parents' house. About $100,000 in repairs. They did the roof, they listed it out here. HVAC, the kitchen, the windows, the flooring. So you did a lot of this rehab in 2020 and you refinanced in 2020. So then the next part is, it was built in the 1950s. So it's old and it had a lot of problems. If you are on the East Coast and you invest where Matt the Lumberjack landlord does, 1950s is practically a brand new house. Most of his properties are early 1900s or 1800s. The range of properties that I own, the newest that I own is 1992. I actually don't want to own anything newer than that. They don't generally cash flow, and tenants don't look at the age of the building. Very rarely, maybe 2 or 3 times in a decade have I ever seen tenants talking about the age of the building. My oldest properties are all the way back to 1921. So 1979 or newer, I generally will buy the property and not consider too many things other than having the home inspection. If it's older than 1979, I want to know when were the repairs done? Does it have cast iron drains? Does it have water pipes that are going to freeze and break? Does it have knob and tube wiring? When were those replacements done? You answer that by saying, we refinanced and renovated this property in 2020. So the property that we're talking about, updates were done in 2020. The property that I purchased that's from 1921, updates were done in 1980s. So I would still look at that property. The next thing is, in your question, you say the property cash flows about $1,300 a month. I would want to clearly understand what that $1,300 a month was. If this is your parents' house and it's cash flowing because you did this renovation and rehab in 2020, you have a mortgage. You said there's about $550,000 worth of debt and it's worth about $1.1 million. So $1,300 a month in cash flow, is that the rents coming in minus your mortgage leaves you with $1,300? That's what a lot of newer investors will think cash flow is. Are you also setting aside for repairs, maintenance, and vacancy? You're going to have repairs and maintenance and vacancy, even if you did the renovations in 2023, let alone 2022. I've heard investors say, well, it was just rehab, so I don't have to set aside for things. No, we're setting aside things today for the roof it's going to need in 25 or 30 years. That's why expenses don't impact cash flow, because we're always setting aside for repairs, maintenance, and vacancy. So when those things happen, it doesn't impact our cash flow. I would want to know that your $1,300 is that, and not just your rents minus your mortgage. Then it is, how do I access my equity? Right? It's $550,000 owed, $1.1 million in value. Those are your estimates that you gave me. So we're going to use this as we're going to go off the premise that those are accurate numbers, meaning you're basically 50% loan to value, right? You owe 50% of the value of the property. So 50% LTV. There are several ways to access the equity, which is, as I said earlier, the ability to add debt to an existing asset. The first is to refinance. You refinanced in 2020, so you're familiar with how this goes. You go to a lender and they will give you generally up to 80%, maybe 85% of the value of the property if you're not living there. So it was your parents' primary, but now there's a tenant that's been there for 2 years. So we have a tenant in place. This is not owner occupied. So we're going to assume up to $800,000 in, eight something, because it's 1.1. So what is that? $880,000 that they will lend you, and you owe $550. So a little over $300,000 that you could pull out in cash. You owe $550. It's worth 1.1. So if you did a cash out refinance and you can get 80% of that value, it means you have up to a little over $300,000 that you could take out. The problem with doing this is if you refinanced in 2020, you got 2020 interest rates, meaning you're probably paying 3%. And if it was owner occupied by your parents when you did it, you might have 2-point-something% interest on that. And if you were to do a cash out refinance now to pull that money out to add the debt to an existing asset, you're looking at 7, maybe 6.5% interest rate if you buy the rate down. Doubling your interest to pull the money out is not really smart. So instead of doing a cash out refinance, you have the option of taking out a home equity line of credit. They might call it a RELOC, rental equity line of credit, because it's not owner occupied, giving you a little higher interest rate and maybe not as much of the loan to value, but we're still going to go with the 80%. So you would leave the debt alone, the $550,000, keeping that 2020 interest rate from when you refinanced. You'd get a home equity line of credit for the money, maybe $300,000 that you could maybe take out. If you're going to use a home equity line of credit, my caution is always, I don't recommend doing this unless you have the ability to pay off the line of credit before the rate adjusts. HELOCs or RELOCs, the rate can adjust in 5, 7, or up to 10 years. So people will say, I have fixed rate debt for 10 years. Awesome. Can you pay it off in 10 years? If you can't, I wouldn't want to use a home equity line of credit, because who knows what interest rates are going to be at the end of that loan. A couple of benefits with the HELOC. It's a lot less costly to put in place, usually almost no cost, or maybe a couple thousand if you have to pay for an appraisal. And you're only taxed on the amount of money that you take out. Now, it does hit your debt to income ratio, about 1% of the value that you take out. So if you take out $300,000, lenders in looking at your debt to income ratio might assume that you have a $3,000 a month payment in your debt to income ratio. So can you handle that? The benefit of the HELOC is as you pay it down, the funds are usable again, like a credit card. So that's one option. The second option is to do a second mortgage. So this gets you fixed rate debt, leaves the original existing debt, that $550,000 alone, not losing the good interest rate that you have it. You only have the higher interest rate on the portion that you take out on that second. Now, the problem with the second is you usually pay slightly higher interest rate. And again, you're limited on that 80% loan to value. So you'll be able to get a second for around $300,000. It's a little more costly to put this in place with the appraisal, maybe buying the rate down. But that's the second option. The other option is maybe you sell it. This is where you benefit from the IRS Rule 121, where your parents lived there for at least 2 out of the last 5 years, and you said there was at least another year left where that was still the case. So they can make up to $500,000 in profit without paying any taxes on it. There's 2 questions that I would ask. First, before you get a HELOC, before you get a second mortgage, or before you're thinking about selling it, what are you going to do with the money? What is the purpose of the cash? Are you confident in your ability to put that money to work that gets a return that's good enough to make money as an investment and to justify the added debt on the existing asset, whether it's the HELOC, the second mortgage, or the loss of the asset if you sell? Add to this the fact that this is your parents' house that you refinanced and did a renovation on in 2020, so there's a partnership involved here. And I started the beginning of the video saying you should get as much of this in writing now while everybody's getting along to protect you and to protect your parents' interests in this deal. But here's the question that I want you to think about the most when it comes to selling. You own a property that's cash flowing $1,300 a month. You have $550,000 in debt that the tenants are paying. You have 2020 interest rates on a property that's worth $1.1 million. Imagine today if you looked on the MLS and no one else saw it, you were the magic unicorn finder that found a property in the same area, the same neighborhood that had tenants in place who love the property the way you said yours do. It's worth $1.1 million. You know that it is. But you have $550,000 worth of debt and you invested $100,000 in the rehab, so $650,000. If you found a property that would cash flow $1,300 a month, that was worth $1.1 million, that you could buy for $650,000, with 2020 interest rates today off the MLS, if you find a lender in a property that would sell it to you with 3% interest, that it would cash flow $1,300 a month, would you buy it? If the answer is yes, I would buy it, why would you sell it? If the answer is no, then maybe you consider selling it. So that's what I would look at here. The idea that you started with was the question of, in 2020, I refinanced my parents' house and did a $100,000 renovation. This is a partnership between you and your parents. What does that look like on paper? If you can't put it in writing, it's based on emotions and probably wouldn't stand up in court when a disagreement happens in the future. So in writing, take care of this now so that when there is a disagreement, you and your parents' interests are protected. The part where you talked about in 2020, you did $100,000 worth of renovations and you had flooring, windows, HVAC, kitchen, all of these things done. For about a decade, I ran a CDL school, a little longer than that, like 13 years. And we had some older trucks, 2000, 2004, right? And we would replace some with 2008. After 2008, they added the camel urine or whatever makes diesel better, and there's so many problems with the trucks, it didn't make it cost effective to buy them. So a lot of our trucks were older as we went through the years. And we'd have a truck, the transmission would be rattly, the student would break the drive line, we'd tear up the rear end, maybe we'd have an in-frame rebuild done on an engine. So we'd have a truck like 005 that was a 2004, and it had a new transmission, a new drive line. I mean, the drive system had been gone through. It had an in-frame rebuild. It had several instances of fiberglass repair. Thanks for that, Bill. But one of our best instructors. It's so funny that he would be the one to get in a wreck. Sometimes people would say, look, we've got this old truck. Look at 05. It's old. We've got so much money into it. We've bought the transmission and the in-frame rebuild and all the work we've done into it. Why don't we sell it and get a new truck? And I thought, hang on. We own a truck that has a new in-frame rebuild. It has a new transmission. It has a new rear end. The drivetrain's been taken care of. This is basically a new truck with an original built-on date that looks scary. Why would we get rid of that truck? You have a house that was built in the 50s. It's old, but your question said it had a lot of problems. Problems that you don't have anymore. That you now have years to take the cash flow from rents to set aside to repair, maintain, and take care of vacancies in the future. Looking at the situation like this, I am a fan of buy and hold investing. I've never sold a property. I've never taken out a HELOC. I've never cashed out, refinanced. I've never taken a second. I like to acquire rentals, recycle the cash flow. Yes, it's not sexy. Yeah, it's kind of boring. And I walk around units like this that I get to redo when a military tenant moves out. And I go here to do a live stream as I show it to the possible new tenants that are coming. And I get to look around and think, this is an older building. That, yeah, my friend did the banister for me, and she did an amazing job. It's got new flooring. I got a new grate so that the fireplace isn't used. That's bolted in place. And I think this is an older building. If I sold it, I could probably buy a newer building that would have less cash flow. And this one's been updated. Your parents' place has been updated in 2020 and has 2020 debt on it. I don't know that I would mess with that. I can't tell you what to do. I'm answering your question, telling you what I would do. When you have equity, when my friends Josh and Mary and Dave and Michelle have properties that they've had for a while, and some of them just closed on duplexes recently. But as the years go by, you're going to see the value go up and the tenants pay the principal down, and you're going to see these shiny equity sitting there. I'm going to quote Emperor's New Groove. No touchy. If you want your questions answered during a live stream, I look forward to seeing you Tuesday, 4 p.m. Pacific. Until my next video, thanks for coming to my Dion Talk.